All right, let's talk about this whole AI and the economy and where things are going. And listen, I don't have a crystal ball, so I can't tell you the future, but I do have a memory. And that memory serves me well when I look at other similar situations that we've been in and what's happened throughout history and how things have changed. So today I want to kind of give you a little bit of a goofy history lesson in order to teach you what's happening right now with AI and where I think it's going to go based on just the data that we've had in the past. So somewhere in 1970, in the US here, gross domestic services surpassed gross domestic product. What does that mean? Well, in reality, here in the US, we started to spend a lot more money on services than we did on product. And we stopped making our own product. I mean, listen, this is not, anything you don't know already. We outsourced most of our manufacturing to China, to Vietnam, to Pakistan, to wherever else in the world. But we started to sell and produce, if you will, services, insurance and repair and all of these other things that we would do, that we would sell a service, someone's physical hours to do something. As that evolved, and we stopped having like a product on the shelf and the service just being like a person to show up to do the thing, it started to get compartmentalized into individual tasks. And then when the smartphone came out, all of a sudden it became a button. And it sounds a little weird, it sounds a little silly, but stick with me here for a second, because now all of a sudden I can go and rent an Airbnb, or I can go to Uber Eats or DoorDash or Instacart or whatever. And all of these tasks became a button that I press and it takes money out of my account and the person comes and does the thing. Now, it sounds really cool. It sounds really convenient, but that created what we call the gig economy. And there was a lot of people who started to treat gigs and tasks as their full-time job. But I'm going to say something that's probably going to upset quite a few people here. A job is not a task or a gig. AI cannot replace jobs anytime soon. It can replace tasks and gigs. So here I am out in the desert. Waymo, the self-driving taxi cars, are all over the freaking place. Now, you might say that, oh, this is wrong. Oh, there's a lot of people who drive for a living, a lot of these things. Well, yeah, you're right to an extent. But as AI is getting better and at least the self-driving mechanisms are getting better, the task, it becomes less of a job and more of a task. And I'll explain more here in a second here. But if I need to drive from location A to location B, that's a task. That's not a job. That's something completely different, right? And now you might consider the job of a limo driver, someone who drives and does customer service and opens the door for you and makes smarter decisions and treats you right and says, hey, let's change our course to go this way, whatever. That's more of a job than a task, but that's changing too. If my job is only to go from point A to point B, that's a task. Same thing with DoorDash or Uber Eats or whatever. It's pick up the order, deliver it here. That's a task. And so I've got a lot of students now that I teach AI to, and specifically how to build like an AI agency and to make a business out of like selling AI and automations to small businesses, specifically so they can compete with these big corporal rats that I just despise, right? But when you look at the difference between big companies and small companies, the reason big companies are failing with AI left and right is because they're trying to automate jobs and it doesn't work. They're trying to replace entire people who do all sorts of things, whereas the small business owner can intelligently build from the ground up. They can actually automate individual tasks that are needed to be done on a day-to-day basis. So small businesses, I believe, are going to be much more impacted by AI than big businesses, because big businesses are still going to need to have people, physical bodies to do jobs. And again, I'll explain the difference here in a second, but stick with me again. If I go onto my DoorDash app, I hit the button, boom, food delivered, whatever it is, that was a task. But now the thing again that upsets people is I lost my job. 8,000 DoorDash delivery drivers laid off. Oh, Uber Eats drivers laid off by the thousands, whatever it is. But they thought that was a job and they were mistaken. And it's a painful lesson to learn because now they see this. Now they're still angry about it. Everyone's still upset that they lose their job. But again, it's the definition that matters, because it wasn't a job, it was a task, it was a gig. And AI does one thing really well. And what I mean by one thing is like one thing. Like it can book appointments, but it can't book appointments. So imagine you're at a dentist. The better half was saying, at the dentist of tooth and enamel, the receptionist who's at the front desk, that is a job. Why? Because they only answer the phones and book appointments? No, that receptionist is managing chaos in many different directions at many different moments. So yes, they're answering the phone, they're booking appointments, they're yelling at Susie who doesn't show up to her appointment every single time she books one. She's rescheduling, she's talking to vendors, she's dealing with cold calls, she's dealing with appointments, she's making sure the schedule, the dentist is taken care of. So that receptionist is doing a ton of different things all at once. That's what I would define as a job, not a task. Now, in the AI space, if I was to teach one of my students, hey, listen, if you want to go help a dentist, you can help them by creating an AI voice receptionist. And it's kind of wrong to call it a receptionist because all it can do is really answer the phone, book appointments, and answer basic questions. Now, of course, it's going to get better over time, but the truth still remains. It still can only do one task in the overall job, which alleviates a lot of stress from that receptionist and allows that receptionist to become even more valuable to that business because they know where everything is, they know what's happening. And this is why I think large companies are really struggling with AI because they're immediately trying to jump into replacing an entire job instead of trying to replace individual tasks and work their way down and have each employee become more valuable, a bigger return on investment. And it sounds so silly to talk about human beings as a return on investment, but these large corporations, that's what they see us as, right? Big numbers, whatever it is. So when we talk about AI, a couple things I want to point out here. If we go from gross domestic product, making things, to gross domestic services, doing things, and then doing those things now was a job, and now we take that job and we chop it up into all these little pieces, which become tasks or gigs, and AI can automate those gigs. We didn't lose jobs, we lost tasks and we lost gigs. So the difference in this translation, the definition is going to be what is a job nowadays? And I was the first one to admit this because when I had friends and past clients and stuff stop calling me for marketing consulting, because look, I've been in the marketing game for like 20 years. Even when I was working for Tony Robbins, I would still have some clients here and there that would call me. Hey, Stephen, can you look at this email? Can you look at this funnel? Can you check out my ad campaign? Can you do this thing? But I didn't realize it until just recently that the reason they stopped calling wasn't because they hate me. They might hate me too. You never know. But the reason they stopped calling is because they were automating the task of write this email, automating the task. And they weren't calling me to hire me for a job. They were calling me to hire me to have a gig or a task completed. And I hope that makes sense because I had to wrestle with this a little bit myself. And I'm not just saying this to be like, oh, you're a DoorDash driver, you're not valuable to the marketplace. Look, that's not my point here at all. But I started to realize that even my tasks were being automated. Why would you hire a marketing consultant for $20,000 a month to do a job when you just needed them to look at your emails one time? And if that was too expensive, you can just go to ChatGPT or Claude and say, look at these emails. And even if it wasn't as good as I could do it, it was instant, it was fast, it was now. They could do 100 iterations before they even got me on the phone. So now all of a sudden that task becomes so much less valuable, and now all of a sudden they can just automate those pieces. And you see this all over the place with marketing and sales right now. Now, the big hubbub that I posted on social media the other day about the silly billboard that everyone got upset about, stop hiring humans. It was for a company that basically does AI BDRs. And if you're not familiar with the corporate rat language, it's business development rep. And their job is supposed to be outbound sales. In other words, cold calling and spamming. Now, a BDR usually goes business to business, right? So they pick up the phone, they email, they text message, they scrape lists, they try to send cold emails and get in touch with people, book appointments and book meetings to sell. And here's what it is. It's a fancy version of a B2B spam robot. Hey, spam robot, spam all these companies to try to get them to buy our shitty software. That's really what it boiled down to. And so everyone got really upset. Oh my God, stop hiring humans. I cannot believe they did this. But they never looked below the surface to see what that company is and what it does. Now, again, I could eat my words because that company itself does between $5 and $10 million a year. They raised like $40 million. Like they're doing well financially. But the thing that I would argue here is who the hell wants to do that job? I don't. Do you? Are they really replacing jobs that someone wanted to do? And maybe the argument is yes, that the BDR is someone who can reach out and spam people. But that's what the human did too. That was a task. It wasn't a job. And again, the argument could be made, because I always want to play devil's advocate. Anytime I'm making a debate or an argument, I want to make sure I'm talking about the other side too. Because you could debate, you could argue that the BDR is someone who builds relationships and takes them out to lunch and gets them drunk and buys them hookers and blows so they buy these contracts or whatever it is. But the one thing that you and I have to focus on as entrepreneurs, as business owners, as dreamers, someone who wants to build something during all this chaos that's going on here, the benefit that you and I have as small business owners is we don't have all of the baggage and the weight of a large company. So we can build our company right from the ground up. And we can use AI automations, not just to avoid hiring people, but to automate tasks that need to get done that we normally couldn't afford to do. Because listen, every small business gets stuck in this situation where they need more people to help them do the work to make more money, but they need more money to hire those people. So they get caught in this catch-22 where they're like stuck. And you only have two options then at that point, right? You either borrow money and you hire the people hoping that it's going to produce a return and you'll be able to pay that money back and make a little bit of a profit, or you just kind of try to stay small and lean or whatever. But the problem with that in business is you're either growing or you're dying, right? You're climbing or you're sliding. There is no standing still in business. If you try to stay small on purpose, like good luck staying in business in 2026, 2027 and beyond. So one thing that I want to point out here today, if you're a small business owner right now, we go back to the dentist example. That receptionist, we can automate the phone calls and bookings, especially after hours or when they're on the phone. You won't believe this. I talked to a lawyer, this is probably 6 months ago now, and I was asking him, I was like, hey, how many phone calls do you miss? Is an AI voice bot good for you? Would this make any sense? He said, no, Steven, we never miss any calls. I've got a receptionist. She's a rock star. She answers the phone. When she leaves the office, she forwards the calls to her phone. She picks up the phone 24 hours a day. Doesn't matter, whatever. I said, great, cool. Even if she's doing that, how many calls do you think she misses? None ever. I'm like, look, dude, his name is Tom. And I'm like, hey, Tom, show me your data. Show me the Ring, because they had Ring Central, right? And that's what they use for their phone service. I was like, show me your Ring Central account. Show me what it looks like. Even with her answering the phone 24/7 and being on the phone a lot, she was still missing 40 to 50% of the calls every single day. Not because she was lazy. She was a freaking rock star. But someone would call and she'd be on the phone and the phone would, the other line would ring. And she can't pick up both phones. She can't do this all the time, 24/7. Are you kidding me? So a voice receptionist would help them to automate the calls that they miss. And I don't know if you knew this, but the average amount of money that a small business loses in the US alone right now is $126,000 a year just from missed phone calls. That's wild, isn't it? Like, you think about the plumber, that's only a $200-300 service charge, but if they're missing 4 or 5 calls a day, I just talked to a car mechanic the other day. He was missing 5-10 calls a day, every day. Not because he's lazy, not because he doesn't care, but because he's freaking working on a car, man. So for him, that's a massive amount of business. He could double his business if he just was able to pick up that call. And that's why I think AI is so valuable in this economy for small businesses. But now for the big businesses, they're making massive mistakes, right? Left and right. I think it's something like 96% of AI projects for big businesses are failing. And I'm just going to point it out. It's because they're dumb. They think that they can automate an entire person or an entire job that's going to think on the fly and figure out where things are. In large companies, it gets so bloated and the infrastructure is so large that, you're never going to replace Kevin, who knows where XYZ file is, and it's underneath on the third drawer in the back, wherever it is. You're not going to replace that information for someone who's actually running the day to day. And you might say, oh, it's more efficient this way, yes or no, but it's not going to get done. That's the truth. So if we're looking at AI and this economy, what's going on here? 3 things I want to point out. Number 1, there's not going to be a lot of jobs lost. There's going to be a lot of tasks and gigs lost. And we have to separate those definitions because otherwise we won't look at the nuances that are important for you and I, right? Number 2, I think big companies are going to use AI as a scapegoat for their layoffs. They overhired during COVID. They overhired slightly after. Facebook laid off 8,000 people and they blamed it on AI customer service. That's bullshit. Facebook's customer service has always sucked and it always continued to suck. They're one of the worst companies on the damn planet. But because they're in the pockets of all these political scum, they get to make all the trillions of dollars they want, right? Now, besides myself here. So when I'm talking about the large companies, they're going to lay people off and they're going to blame AI. But it wasn't because of AI, it's because they overhired. Now there's going to be other companies who are going to blame AI as that, but you got to be really articulate here. You have to really understand, are they producing a task or a gig, or are they replacing a job? And for those of you guys who want some sort of stability, listen, I truly believe you should always have your own business. I think that AI is going to recreate the golden age of entrepreneurship, not because it's such a huge opportunity, but because it's necessity. All of us are going to have to be the local blacksmith and the local baker and the local thing or whatever, and we're going to have to serve our fellow mankind locally in our communities, and that's the way you're going to have job security, business security, income security. It's not going to be, trying to get a job at one of these giant corporations, which that's a conversation for another day. So again, 3 things. 1, we're going to see a lot of layoffs. They're going to blame AI. 2, the values in understanding the difference between a job and a task and a gig. And if you understand that you have a job and you're creating a job for yourself or you're part of a job, you're going to be pretty safe and secure. But I would still reference taking that into entrepreneurship, having your own business doing that job versus just a task. And then be very careful of what tasks that you're doing in your job, because those will be automated. So listen, I don't know if this is the most valuable rant here today, but I want to kind of open up this conversation, because when I started talking about this, man, did I get some creepy messages and some upset people and all this stuff. But tell me, is there something in your life right now that looks like a task or a gig that could be automated? If you're a business owner, what are the tasks and gigs that you should be automated instead of trying to do it all yourself, or instead of trying to scrape together the cash to hire someone to do it? And if you're a big company, well, good luck. We'll see you in the ring.